You're going to say, this is B. Jeffery Madoff, and you're watching the Break It Down. This is B. Jeffery. Yeah, you know what to do. And you're watching the Break It Down show. That's what you're going to do. Go ahead.
Hi, this is B. Jeffery Madoff, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
I am trying to say Madoff, and I keep screwing it up. Sorry, Jeff. Jeffrey or Jeff? Can I call you Jeff?
Yep, of course.
Okay. So you can go to Madoff Productions to get just a piece of what Jeff does. He's an incredible dude who.
We've got get more on Bernie.
Oh shit! Get that out of there. I'm as screwed up as possible here today. All right, sorry. He really did make off with the name. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go.
You got a little spelling error there, but
Jesus Christ, I'm going too fast. Let me slow down. Okay, let's just go without that for right now. Okay, cut that. Okay, why don't you give us just a quick introduction on who you are, and then we'll go forward from there.
So I'm Jeffery Madoff, and I live in New York City. I have a production company, coincidentally called Madoff Productions. You can see that at www.madoffproductions.com. And I direct commercials, branded content, and documentaries. I'm a professor at Parsons School of Design, and I teach a course that I developed called Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. And that was also the basis for my book that came out this summer. Oh, I can do a shameless book plug.
Please.
Shameless book plug. Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas, which is a lot of the advice and stories about my career and the wonderful guests that I've had. I have a guest every week that we kind of deconstruct what they do. An incredibly wide range from comedians to best-selling authors to Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists, quite a range. And I love the teaching. It's wonderful. And I'm also a playwright. I have a play that's going to be opening. We moved it actually till February of 22 because of the unusual circumstances we're in, about Rock and Roll Hall of Fame legend Lloyd Price, otherwise known as Mr. Personality. So that's a quick rundown. And I'm a husband, a father, and live in the Upper West Side of New York City.
And that's great. Just in case the audience missed it, that was a lot of stuff. You've done commercials for Victoria's Secret, the Tiffany brand. I mean, really high-end, gorgeous stuff. And again, everybody should go to the website. I've actually got it typed in correctly this time, madoffproductions.com. But you're here really primarily to talk about this fantastic book. And I want to dive into that because one of the things that, I get a lot of people, because we're in this creative space, and I'm a bit of a name in the podcast world. I get asked, how do I do this? How do I do the podcast thing? And one of my pieces of advice is just to start doing it. If you're hung up on the right name, it's too late. And the example I always use is, the Greek word for Nike, and of course they don't know off the top of their head what it is. I mean, the Greek word for victory, and they'll say, I don't know what it is, but it's Nike. But you don't know the Turkish word for victory, which is really a more common word, because Nike went out and made something out of themselves. They didn't come out of the gate with like, hey, waffle pattern sneakers and LeBron James. They had to make it into something. So that making part, you've been a creative person your whole life. When did you figure out that production was much more important than perfection?
Well, I strive for both, but as the saying goes, practice makes perfect.
Yep.
But the corollary to that is nobody's perfect. So, it's kind of a Mobius loop of never really achieving perfection. And I think that, it's interesting you mentioned Nike because their slogan is just do it.
Yeah.
And when I start the semester with my students, I'll say, how many of you have been to a gallery or seen something that's very successful and think, oh, I could have done that? Of course, they all raise their hand. And I say, well, what is the difference between you and them? And there's silence. And then finally someone lights up, and this is inevitable every semester. And they said, well, because they actually did it. And I said, that's right. That's right. And that's where the phrase comes, ideas are a dime a dozen, but it's all about execution and actually just getting it out there and getting it done. If you worry about making it perfect before you do that, you'll never accomplish anything.
Yeah, I think every author that I've asked this question, like, was the book what you wanted it to be when you finished it? And they're all like, no, but it gets to a point where it's done. And whatever warts and imperfections it has, they're part of that book. And I need to get on to the next thing. It's not about that perfection piece.
I think that you're right. And, there's a phrase that a piece of art or work is never finished, but it's abandoned.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, and I know I function best this way, it's about a deadline, and I do well on deadlines. If I don't have a deadline, there's a vast vista of time that project can take. But if I have a deadline, I'm going to get it done. And, I'm just triggered that way. And that just works best for me.
One of the other gears you have to hit as a creator, I would submit, is that, okay, idea, production, and then repetition of production. Like you have to, Jackson Pollock didn't become something because he drizzled some paint on some canvas. He kept going. He kept getting better. He kept doing it, producing and building a name for himself. There's really very few authors that write one incredible book and then quit. It just doesn't happen reliably.
Right. Right. I mean, there are some that don't write much. Like J.D. Salinger was not a prolific writer, but Catcher in the Rye. If you write a book like that, you don't need to write much more, And then there are people that sell incredibly well or incredibly prolific, Stephen King, comes to mind. And there are those that are able to have that kind of an output. But I think that part of creativity is a compelling need to make a difference. And whether that's in a book that you publish, a business that you build, a painting you paint, it's all of those things. And so I think that's a key part of it. Execution, as you said, is also essential, because if you don't get your ideas out there, what do they mean?
Yeah. And it might be that it takes you 20 of your ideas before enough people catch on, and then you catch on to what you're catching on to, to get it, and it's, because that is what it's like. I mean, your best painting, a band's first album is oftentimes its best because it took a lifetime to that point. And then it's like, now the next one, and now the next one. And it gets really hard after the fourth album. It's that repetition in the studio, making something. It's required, even when it's scary, even when you're forced to do something you haven't done before.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And, what's interesting, if you look at the Beatles, who actually weren't together all that long, but to this day, their records continue to sell. And of course, they're an iconic music group, and they're so lauded for their creativity. When they played Yankee Stadium, they realized they don't want to do live concerts anymore. They couldn't hear themselves play. And what they wanted to do is get back to the studio to do what they wanted to do in the first place, which was to create new music. And when they went back in the studio, that became the watershed moment where some of their most creative work ever came out. And it's kind of fascinating because you have to find what works for you. You have to find, how can you be the most productive? And, there's no one path to that.
There's some courage involved in that, because they definitely, I mean, if you look at the number of countries the Beatles toured, it's less than 10. I believe it's 8.
Wow.
And yeah, it's shocking when you hear that, but they made the right decision. They did get in the studio. They combined all that genius level talent together, including Billy Preston and all these other people, right. Eric Clapton, all these people who really wanted to be part of what they were creating. But that's not an easy jump to make. I mean, you got to pay the bills, and everybody wants you to do something else, but you're the artist. And sometimes the artist decision is the wrong one, in terms of like commercial success and financial freedom.
You're right. And I think it's very interesting. And you see that in all creative fields, because a lot of the people that surround you, when it becomes a business, like your agent, your manager, and so on, they're interested in generating revenue. And the artist is oftentimes interested in generating new work and somehow doing something that keeps them engaged in what they're doing. And that becomes a real challenge, because you can lose your own voice because you're hearing so many voices around you. And sometimes it's necessary to just stop, regroup, and get a sense of who you are, and where you want to go, because otherwise the other voices are going to rule and dominate your career. And that's when you get into a whole other issue, when you start to not even like what you're doing, because you're so blocked in terms of the creative expression that you got into it for in the first place.
Yeah, you think about the people that accomplished their dream, like no one well, not no one, but a lot of people in rock music would say, if we could just get signed, it would be the greatest day ever. And then you get signed and it's like a new goal, like, well, if we could tour nationally, and you get that and you're like, Christ, I hate this. It's like it's so much work to be on the road. This is where it goes back to that abandonment of a project and then accepting that this is work here. And then your art branches off of that. Is that a fair to say?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, it's always nice when, you hear people say, I don't work, I play. I mean, you play music in theater, which I'm working in. It's called a play. And so the play part is really wonderful, but it's never always wonderful, and it is, if you're making your living doing it, there are times that it is a job. I think that if you are doing something you love doing, it's less of a job most of the time, we hope, than if you're doing something where you're punching a time clock and you're having to report to other people all the time. But, if you weren't sort of built that way, and you weren't built, I'm an entrepreneur because I'm unemployable. So, I think that, I just wasn't built in a way that I could get a regular job and do a corporate gig.
Yes.
But it's rough, it's not easy. I think that a lot of people think in terms of entrepreneurship, creativity, that, wow, that's the dream situation. But you're having to generate everything. You don't have an infrastructure that protects you and helps you keep going. So there's payroll to meet, there's insurance to pay, there's all of these things that are the drudge of business that are necessary if you're going to try to keep your career going. And you have to be aware of that stuff. You just have to be realistic about what it is.
Yeah, it really is the artist's dilemma, that balancing. You have to be a business person, but I'm not a business person. I'm an artist. Yeah, but you have to be a business person because you can't do all these things yourself. That means you have to share what you can create revenue-wise with other people who are good at those things. And we all fall into this trap as entrepreneurs of, I wear all the hats. It's like, well, I have to get hats off my head. And actually, I need to get really good people to wear the other hats, because if I skimp here and I cut there, I'm harming my business. Now, with that said, I mean, you can't just pay everybody exorbitant fees. You have to balance that. But that business side, it is. I talk to musicians all the time, and I've been using musicians a lot as an example. We can get off of that, but they struggle because their job is to touch those keys, to stroke those strings, to write that melody. But the reality is and you hate it, but you have to hire lawyers, and probably have to have lawyers for your lawyers, and you have to have all these other people to make a real successful business work. And if you buy crap lawyers, you can get into a lot of trouble.
Well, you're right. And I think that one of the keys in business that you're not taught in school is that you need to have the complementary talents to what you do that allows you and facilitates your expression. So I have a terrific executive producer, Ed Daly, who's been with me for 20 years. And, I drive him crazy, but, he creates a situation through his competence, through his sense of organization, through how meticulous he is in everything, that I can pursue other things like teaching and playwriting and all that sort of thing, which is just a compelling need that I have. But I know that the business of the business is in good hands. And I think that's really critical, is you need to find someone or some people who can augment what you do. And I think that's really critical.
I want to get back into that augmentation thing, but let me first sort of cap this point that I'm trying to get us to wrap our heads around. Recently, Rolling Stone put out another iteration of their 500 best albums of all time. And this one is weighted heavily towards social justice. Normally the Rolling Stones are in love with the Beatles and they stay at the top of the list, but these are different times. And so whether or not you agree with them, this goes back to that production thing. Part of the point of this list is to get you to argue with it. That's the whole point. Like Art Nouveau drives me crazy. Like you go to an Art Nouveau museum and I'm like, it's just a fucking fork, but it's an entire movement where you're like, yeah, it's a chair. I can see it. It's this. Why is this? And you struggle with these things. So part of art requires some kind of reaction. Otherwise, if it was just a chair or a fork, you'd walk right by it and never notice it.
Well, and I'm noticing, by the way, in the background, a guitar.
Yeah.
So you play?
A little bit. I'm not any good. I just, I have it and I strum. I try to be able to play and sing at the same time and try to sing on key. That's kind of where my skill level stops.
Yeah, I think that when you are trying to make a living with your ideas, there's all kinds of business reality things you have to confront that and people you need to supplement and augment what you do so that you can do that well. Because if you're the person that is wearing all the hats, and most businesses start that way, if you don't learn how to delegate and you don't learn how to trust other people, if you think you're the only one that can do it right, you've really painted yourself into a corner. And you have to ask yourself the question is, why did you start the business? To do everything or to try to facilitate you doing something that's really important to you?
How do you make that jump? I mean, right now it's COVID time. People are trying to redefine what it is they do. A lot more creative endeavors have been, started during these last 6-7 months. But how do you decide if this is a pastime, a profitable passion, or something you can make money at?
That's, of course, the multi-million-dollar question, Pete.
That's right.
But, I think there's two things. First of all, you can't be the only one in love with your idea or your creation. So you need to establish a proof of concept. Is anybody else as interested in this as you are? Are people going to be willing to buy it who aren't your friends or family who maybe want to support you? So you really have to find that out. And that's really an important thing. Proof of concept is key. And I've done that with each of the businesses that I've started. And that teaches you a lot. Because if you're the only one that thinks it's a good idea, you're going to have trouble. So I think that's an essential part of it. And when you're in a time like COVID, none of us has been in a time like this before. I mean, this is unique in history. Unless you go back to 1918, this is a totally unique time. Could you imagine, by the way, this COVID situation if there wasn't the internet?
Oh my God.
There wasn't streaming video, we'd all be going crazier than we are.
Okay.
But one of the things that I like to point out about that is if you look back through creative endeavors, and we're talking music, we're talking paintings, books, movies, all of these things, the great stories and the great expressions that have lasted and become iconic all happened not during times of blissful happiness. They happened during times of crisis and tragedy, because that's when the emotions are raw. That's when the expression is raw, and everybody goes through that. So I think it's really important to understand that those feelings of insecurity, of fear, of all these things that people are going through, and now even fatigue with all of this, it's really important to understand that if you can harness your feelings, focus those emotions, your expression has the potential to be really profound and really resonate. And that's when all great works of art and creative expression happen, is during that, whether it's personal crisis, a relationship falls apart, you lose your job, you fight an addiction, whatever it is, or a crisis that is social and cultural, like what's happening with COVID. And it's really fascinating, because initially when I was asked to write an article about this, it was really interesting to me, because when I got that insight, because I was thinking, God, what's good about this? You know, like nothing. But there are things that come out of these, things that come out of world wars. Some of the greatest novels ever came after World War II. So, you know, these things can be fuel for a creative person.
Some examples. What stands out for you for what you like from these times of strife, whether it's personal work or somebody else's work?
I think the emotional engagement that fosters, you know, so when you see something, for instance, like one of my favorite books and movies of all time is To Kill a Mockingbird. And, you know, that was dealing with, it was two things. It was really interesting. When I was in school and we read that, uh, everybody spoke about how it was about civil rights, and that the black man was uh, un- unjustly accused of a crime, which is true. But the real story in that is it's a love story between Scout, the little girl, and her father, Atticus Finch. And it's a love story. But, you know, the respect was seen through how he was able to put himself on the line, his career on the line, because he was seeking justice. And so often what resonates with me is the individual against a certain society, and fighting for those things, you know, and it's a righteous battle. So that book really hit me when I was a kid. I've watched the movie, I don't know how many times, and I loved watching it with my kids when they were little, you know, and just hearing what they thought when they saw it. So I think that there are things that happen, whether again they're personal battles or whether they're on a much bigger scale, that just resonate. And of course, if it resonates with you, the reason why it resonates is it clearly strikes some kind of emotional chord. And that's what good stories do, is they engage on an emotional level. It's not about just making you laugh. You know, it's about making you, like what you were saying before, that you talk about it afterwards, you know, that it causes further conversation. It's not over when you close the book or finish the movie or walk out of the gallery.
The landscapers are in the damn yard right now. I forgot that Monday morning. Anyhow, we're going to get past that. Atticus Finch was played by Gregory Peck. Are
Yes.
you a Gregory Peck fan? Does that help lock that story in for you?
No, because when I saw it, I wasn't a Gregory Peck fan. You know, I was a kid, a little kid. But I actually met Gregory Peck years later. As a matter of fact, it was astounding. I had done a film for Liza Minnelli, and this was at Radio City Music Hall. It was a big comeback tour for her called Stepping Out. And have you ever been to Radio City Music Hall?
I have not. No.
You know, it's just it's a magnificent theater. And it was a blast doing this. And there was a big opening night party in the Rainbow Room, which overlooks New York. It's in Rockefeller Center. It was really cool. And this story, by the way, doesn't relate to much, except it's a cool story. What happened was, after the show, there was this party. And my wife and I walk in, and there's Gregory Peck sitting there alone. And this is like 1991. And I walk up to him and say to him, I've always wanted to shake Atticus's hand. And so we shake hands. And, you know, he said, you know, it's interesting you said that. I was just with Alan Pakula, who was the producer of To Kill a Mockingbird. We were wondering if that movie would get made today, in today's conditions. What do you think? I said, I don't know, but what a sorry statement about our culture if it wouldn't. And I said to him, what was special to you about making that movie? And he said, well, I'm not just saying this because I won the Academy Award. I'm saying this because in the 175 movies I've made, that stood out the most to me. And he said, now, let me tell you what happened the first day of shooting. I walked on set, and we shoot movies out of sequence. And I was wearing the white linen 3-piece suit. that Atticus always wore in real life. And on the set was Harper Lee, the author. And I walked out there for the first scene. Harper Lee looked at me, started crying, and ran out. And I was thinking, oh my God, did I do something to offend her? I'm so sorry. What happened? I don't know. She came back an hour and a half later, and she said, I was overcome. You look so much like my father that it was overwhelming for me. But there was one thing missing. And he said, what's that? And he said, she said, he always had this watch fob, this little chain. His pocket watch was in his vest. And whenever he would be giving a closing argument or saying something, he would rub his thumb over the face of that watch. And I want you to have it. And she gave him her father's watch. And he said, I've carried it with me ever since. And when I received the Academy Award, while I was standing there, I had my hand in my pocket and I was rubbing my thumb over the face of that watch. I said, oh, wow. And then he said, would you like to see it? And he takes his hand out of his pocket and he hands me that watch. And I was like, oh, wow, this is so cool.
Incredible.
Yeah, it was so cool. So where this all relates is also that was a creative expression that he felt was the closest to who he was as a person. Gregory Peck thought that the part of Atticus Finch so resonated with him. And when Harper Lee validated that by giving him the watch and as a gift and as certifying how much that he nailed the character of her father in that movie, it was an emotional moment for him that resonated throughout literally the rest of his life. And it was really, really cool. So when you have those breakthrough moments, when things happen that feel to you unique, like that experience was to him. And frankly, the story that I got from it is unique. I mean, I love that story. When he handed it to me, I literally got the chills. Yeah. It was amazing. And I think that that's how great work moves you. And that's how great work touches you. And I think it's important to really take a look at what is that so resonates in my bone marrow that I feel that strongly when I see something or hear something.
We have an opportunity to make something great. Editing is. I watch a lot of those design shows with design clothes, and the judges are constantly like edit, 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 edit. And so I try to take that lesson with what I do. I try to say less. I try to pick better, guests when I'm able to do it. I try to edit my own way. But talk a little bit about editing and the importance of it.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I'm glad you mentioned that, Pete, because editing is the key to any creative work. In fact, I think it's the key to just about everything, because Michelangelo was asked, how did you sculpt a statue like David? And he said, I chipped away everything that didn't look like David. And editing is finding that masterpiece within that block. And you find it by cutting away and cutting away and cutting away. If you are a chef, you do that with the seasonings that you use. If you're a painter, you do that with the palette that you use. If you're a photographer, it's what you contain in the frame. If you're a writer, it's what you cut out as much as what you leave in. So I think that editing is an incredibly powerful tool. And there's a phrase in writing, that you have to be willing to kill your babies or kill your darlings. And when I was writing this play, I'll give you a practical story about the editing. When I was doing the play, we did what's called a table read with the actors. And I'm there with my director, and there's a scene where Lloyd Price is in Australia. First time he ever goes there. And it's the first time he ever gets high. First and only time, actually. And the actors are reading it and they're cracking up. And the people are laughing all around the table. And, I wrote it. So I'm thinking, oh, this is cool. They're laughing. This is good. But something was off. Wasn't sure what it was. Something was off. So we took a break. And I said to the director, Sheldon Epps, Sheldon, what do you think of the Australia scene. And he said, well, it's an interesting story. It's entertaining, but is it essential? And I said, what do you mean? Is it essential? He said, does it reveal more about the character, or does it move the plot forward? And I said, no. He said, then it's not essential. We don't need it. And boom, there went 5.5 pages out of the script. But that, is it essential, I think, is a question that every creative person should ask themselves as they're evaluating their work at different stages. Sometimes you need to get everything out and you start doing that. But when you're making the decision of what to leave in and what to take out, ask yourself that question. Is it essential? I think that's absolutely critical.
I think there's a second level of editing too we should probably discuss, and I know you'll get this. There's like those kind of story-driven, doesn't advance the narrative. But then there's also the individual edits, where maybe you have to patch something together, or, and so you have to create a scene, or, oh my gosh, we need a transition here. Like that micro editing that the actual editor does in the editing bay to do a totally different kind of editing where they may do a perfect job, but then you watch it as a whole thing and you're like, something's still not right. Like, yes, this is all welded together, but let's talk about that a little bit, because I think because we see that a lot in movies where you're like, why did they show that person riding the horse for 45 seconds across the screen and take all that time? What is going on here?
Well, it's interesting. Having been in those situations, I can tell you why it happens some of the time. Whether it's riding the horse or you're seeing the overhead shot of a car driving someplace, which is a boring shot always, and what for? Sometimes they don't have any other transition. Sometimes they're covering up audio edits, with the dialogue. They've eliminated things and they don't have it with the characters in there. So they cut away to a shot of somebody riding the horse or driving the car or something. And sometimes it's just a creative blank that happens, and they put it in to somehow change the pace of things. But when you rely on having to do that, it's usually covering something that you didn't get when you were doing your original production, and you needed something to cover dialogue or make a transition because you didn't get it. And so it's often that sort of a thing.
There's the other thing too, is when you reach a certain level of fame and success as an artist, it's hard to edit you externally. You really need people that trust and have not power over you, but respect, so that when you come in, and I think there's times, and I love Stevie Wonder, I think there's times where it's like, that was too much Stevie control in this. Like, it becomes overindulgent. Yes, it's all wonderful, but if everything's wonderful, then, even Stevie Wonder can suffer from the lack of the ability to have someone externally edit. How does someone who reaches that level, how do they find that external voice that allows them, they trust, that allows them to hold themselves accountable for what's great enough?
That's a fantastic question and a challenge. And I think where that comes from is not letting your ego get to the point where you think you're the only one that has the right answers. So I'm really fortunate in my play. The director is a fabulous collaborator because we agree on one thing all the time. We have a lot of differences, but we agree on one thing all the time. And that one thing that we agree with all the time is we want this to be the best possible piece of work in front of that audience. So it's not about pride of ownership. It's not about, oh, this was my idea. It's about how do we put the best piece of work in front of an audience? And we're agnostic as to the source of that idea. What we want is the best thing up there. So I think, I think that way, when I see Quentin Tarantino movies, they can always be about 20 minutes shorter, a half hour shorter. Yes. But nobody is saying to him, Quentin, you got to cut that out. That's just, it's too much. This is a scene that is too self-indulgent. You're into your own, world here, but it's stopping the forward progress of the story. It's stopping the velocity of the story. It's not worth putting in every trick, and indulging everything. He's an extraordinarily talented writer, very good director, great taste in music and art direction, all that kind of stuff. But I don't think I've ever seen one of his films, with the possible exception of Pulp Fiction, that couldn't have benefited from being 20 minutes or so shorter. And few people leave a movie and wish it was a lot longer, So it's finding that point where, wow, you've really satisfied the viewer, you've engaged them the whole time, and you've gotten out of your own way. And that goes back to what I said before, which is you can't be the only one in love with your idea. But when you're really powerful, when you make a lot of money, when you employ people, it's harder and harder to find truth tellers within that group, because people want to hold on to the money.
It's actually an academic term, satisficing. Satisficing, where they're trying to keep the golden goose happy, and if it wants more time, and that's not good for the golden goose. The golden goose needs something to lean it out. It needs a trainer,
And I don't know anybody that doesn't ultimately respect somebody. You may not like that person, but I think there's a real respect for truth if you recognize it as truth. I mean, when Sheldon said to me, "Is it essential?" What was brilliant about that is he put the question on me and I had to come up with the answer, and then I was invested in the same solution he was. That's smart. But he wasn't doing it to manipulate the situation. That's just a way to deal with people so that they're a part of the decision process, as opposed to somebody saying, "Oh, that doesn't work." I mean, that's the worst thing when you're dealing with a client. They go, "Oh, that doesn't work. You need to change that." I said, "Okay, what are you talking about?" "Well, yeah, it just doesn't work for me." I said, "No, I heard that. What do you mean?" It's just not right." "Yeah, I get that. That's why you want to change it. But give me some actionable advice." And I think that's another thing that's really important if you're being directed, that you need actionable direction, you need actionable advice. And when you're dealing with those other voices, you need somebody that you trust to tell you the truth. So I think that's critical.
That question he asked you too is clever, because it's a closed question. And he likely knows the answer, but needs you to realize it. So he lets you do the work instead of convincing you. And then if you were to come back and say yes, then you have to go into convincing mode and say, this is why it's there. But you still have to work through that problem that he probably recognized you hadn't done.
You're absolutely right. That's right. But what is better, have somebody just tell you what to do, or to involve you in the process? Where are you going to get the better alignment with people? And that to me is what's critical to having a good creative collaboration, is there's mutual respect. You listen to the other ideas as opposed to discounting them out of hand because they're not yours. And, and there have been things I've experienced multiple times in business that I actually learned this. And my mom sort of taught me this. There's so many times that I've suggested something, hasn't happened, and then 45 minutes later in the meeting, the person in charge says, "We ought to do X," which is what I said, but they said it as if they just originated the idea. And my mom said to me, "Let them think it's theirs. What do you care? They hired you, you're being paid. Let them think it's their idea. Then you can move on." And she was right. So, when I was younger, I used to feel compelled to say, "Well, that's what I said before." Instead, I just say, "Yeah, that's a great idea." Great idea. Let's move forward with that. That's terrific. And I don't have to have that pride of authorship. And that keeps the project moving forward.
The head stripper is literally outside the tent right now. If you ask me this question. In the spy world, I used to be a spy. It's the same thing. If you are an Army spy, you find someone really incredible, the CIA comes and snatches them from you. And they don't say thank you. They just take it and do it. You can choose to get offended by that and be mad about it, but the reality is they have the resources. You found something incredible. Go continue to do that, and everything will be fine. Everything, because you know how to find the right kind of people, whether it's in war or in corporate America. You can find the people that matter and advance the mission.
Well, and you're also, I think creative people are often afraid of people stealing their ideas. And by definition, if you're creative, you have lots of ideas. So you don't need to hold on to them with white knuckles. You want to just keep moving forward. And I think you keep moving forward by selectively letting go.
And if your ideas are great, you can't be too precious with them, because then no one else will follow. That's a big thing. And I want to kind of transition into this. How do you create value? But that's one of the things, like, you can't be too precious. So what does an artist do when they're like, I've been burned before? How do you get past that? Because if no one knows you're brilliant, then you're not brilliant.
Yes. But can I ask you a favor?
Please.
Can I ask you to put up the website for Creative Careers?
Yes,
it's
I will.
It's acreativecareer.com.
Okay.
So your question was, repeat the question for me. I'm sorry, I was distracted.
You can't be so precious that you throttle your own success. Again, you can't be brilliant if no one knows that you're brilliant. So you have to, the engineer who designs a great product and tells you how great the product is, but no one cares, right?
Right.
So how do you develop that capacity? You've been burned before. Someone stole your idea. Someone stole your story. You get so wrapped up in it that everything's precious.
Yeah, I think everything is precious, or you overprotect everything and you're not willing to share. And look, I can understand if, especially during the earlier years of one's career, if they've been ripped off and feel ripped off, that they're going to want to protect themselves. And oftentimes that protection manifests in keeping secrets. And, that's what they do. I think that as one matures, hopefully realize kind of how the world works. Because if you hold on to that resentment or anger and you really, thank you, and you really just sort of hold those ideas so close to your chest, you're also not going to enlist the best efforts of those around you, because they need to know more in order to be able to do more and contribute. So I think that can come with maturity and confidence, the confidence that that's not your only idea, and you can come at things in a multiplicity of ways.
One of the things I've had to learn to do as a creator is learn to identify where I specifically, and I mean specifically, need help, and then ask for it, whether it's money or whatever it is. And accept help when it comes. Like when someone comes and they don't know how to help you, but they want to take you out to lunch, you say, yes, of course. And you let lunch be how they help you. If you don't allow people to help, you actually kind of push them away from supporting you in a way that probably doesn't support your artwork. Is that crazy, or do you think that that's accurate?
Well, I think that, first of all, you have to be somewhat discriminate about where you're seeking help. Although you can be surprised. You can be surprised where sometimes some great advice or help originates. So I think it's I don't think that one should ever be hesitant to ask for help unless you are burdening someone else unreasonably by asking. For instance, one of the things that I think is really important, I stress to the students that I have and to entrepreneurs when I'm doing speaking gigs or whatever, is you need to find mentors, people that you can talk to and people that can offer you guidance. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. What it does mean is that you're hearing other voices, and those other voices are looking out for your best interests. And so I think that's really important. And we can find those, in school. It can be your classmates, a number of which have complementary talents, and there's things that you can do. But also in adult life, You meet people, you talk to people, and you make yourself vulnerable by sharing what you do. And there may be people that spark to it. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've met that have either ended up guests in my class, who've ended up investing in my play, who I've gotten business from that I never ever expected. But because I put it out there, some people respond. And from that group, it starts off as this big group. Then there's the ones that respond. Then there's the ones that actually engage. And then there's the ones that actually do something. But you get to that point, it's kind of more of the editing process, right? But that helps move everything forward. And it forms relationships that can be incredibly valuable, not just in terms of one's career, but emotionally, because there's people that you can actually talk to and tell the truth to without fear of being hurt by sharing your truth with them. But they support you in your efforts.
There's a lot in this topic that we could talk about, but I don't want to run out of time before we cover another challenging topic as a creator. When you go to branch out on your own, you have that conundrum of, I want to make it. I know what this is worth to me, but you're probably undercharging for it. It's probably worth a lot more, but you also have to charge less to prime the pump a little bit. How does one reckon with that really challenging problem of knowing what you're worth and being able to actually extract what you're worth out of it? Like it's something I struggle with myself.
Well, when you're talking about knowing what you're worth, by the very question, that involves and presupposes people are willing to pay that, right? So you can't say that you're worth $1,000 an hour and nobody's willing to pay you more than $150, So you need to be realistic within the context of what you're doing, what your worth is. So it's good to be confident, but you need some kind of precedent to establish that this, in fact, is what you're worth. Because otherwise, it's interesting. There's kind of two sales that go on. First you have to sell yourself that whatever you're asking is worth it.
Yes.
And then you can sell that to the client. And you also have to weigh certain things, so if I'll give you an example. If doing a job at a lesser rate than you would rather do it at, but let's say you're in a climate where there's not a lot of business happening, like this has been true for unless you're doing streaming videos or food delivery services,
right?
A lot of companies have been having a rough time, right?
Tell me about it. Yes.
So it's a buyer's market. So you can hold on to what you think is worth, and if you can afford to turn away work, then you can hold on to that. I suggest not being delusional and understanding the context of the situation. But, if you can afford to say no and afford not to do the work and you want to maintain a certain value, then so be it, as long as you're comfortable with not getting the gig. If it's at a time where your time is in scarcity because you're in high demand, well, that shows that you are valued and you can up that value because your time is a finite resource. And if you reach the point where that time is scarce, then you can up your price, or your product is scarce, you can up your price because there's a demonstrated value out there and you can play off of that. When I was designing clothes, I had started a trend with a certain kind of shirt that was pretty cool. It was something that my dad had saved, and it was like from the 1940s, and it was really cool. There was nothing else like it on the market, and so I made it. And when I was doing one of the clothing shows, this person came in, a buyer, and he wanted to buy the shirt for his stores. And he said, well, whatever company across the hall is selling something very similar to that for 20% less. And I said, well, if you like it, then go buy it from them. And he said, I love this. He said, well, they're out of stock.
Oh,
And I said, when I'm out of stock, I'll sell it to you for half price. So scarcity gives you a good reason to up prices, demand and scarcity. But when you're trying to, maybe you have an opportunity to sell to a client who can provide a tremendous platform for you, but the only way you're going to get that platform is charging less, then you've got to really establish the value of that platform to you and whether it's worth doing less. It's all a calculus of business and future business. There's no one answer there. You can stick to your guns all the way to debt. So, you got to figure out what's of value to you too.
there's got to be some cuts and bruises in that process too. Like you get that deal with Costco. I guarantee you're not going to make much money on it, but you will expose your brand to an enormous market.
That's right, which is why a lot of people do it. I mean, Amazon's becoming more and more that. It's harder and harder for sellers, who work through Amazon, because Amazon will, if you're successful enough, they've been known, from what I have read and heard, to basically copy your product for less because they know what it sells for and they have all the data around who's buying it. So yeah, it's cutthroat out there. There are a lot of bruises that will come. Absolutely. The only way to combat that effectively is that you establish a brand. And when you establish a brand presence, then you're no longer just a commodity. Personal computers are a commodity. You can buy very fine functioning personal computers from a whole range of vendors. But there's only one place that makes the Apple. And Apple is the only computer that is almost cult-like in the devotion of its consumers.
Yeah.
And it's not that they did something that's so phenomenal. I mean, they had nice design. They've never innovated a new product. They've always iterated on somebody else's product. But through brilliant marketing and brilliant brand management, they make it seem like it's theirs. I mean, when the iPod came out, everybody thought that was so phenomenal. Well, Sony created and owned the personal listening experience with the Walkman.
Yeah.
But when Apple came in, they took total ownership of that marketplace. And so they did it really great. And that's because of the power of a brand. And, you started off our conversation talking about Nike. They're twice as big, more than twice as big as the number 2 athletic shoe and apparel company, which is Under Armour. And it's because Nike has established such a staggeringly strong brand that, like that, wait, let me do a better finger snap. There we go. Like that,
Hey.
You knew their slogan. And I have stood up in front of a few thousand people doing a lecture, and I go, so I'm going to do a one finger gesture. What brand is this? And I go, like that.
Yeah.
And everybody knows what it is, which, by the way, at this point, probably costs hundreds of millions of dollars or more to burn that into our frontal lobes. But that brand, the success of having a good brand, brings about a loyalty and a following, not unlike a religion. And that's why companies like Apple can charge more and always has this devoted following.
And when you think about Nike, you can think about a lot of brands that don't exist anymore. I mean, Under Armour didn't exist, let's say 25 years ago. They didn't exist. Now they're the number 2 shoe. But there's also British Knights, doesn't exist at all anymore. LA Gear, which I guess exists in the form of Skechers. Pony was a major brand 25, 30 years ago. And in these different movements happen, but Nike continues to just burn over the top of these things because they continue to have great ideas and push the bounds of, you look at Oregon's football uniforms. Now every team has a multitude of uniform options, because Nike's like, this is how we're going to innovate. And so then they sell even more, like they create this marketplace where now they sell even more jerseys to teams because they're the ones that know how to make all these different patterns, designs, textures, the black Mamba uniform that the Lakers are using. This is Nike's brilliance in that they're not just making running shoes anymore.
Well, you're right. And so they did something else that was really interesting that happened in 2017. There was a lot of, and is even more, political turmoil in this country and divisiveness in this country and polarization. And when they put out the Colin Kaepernick commercial, they violated what had been a long-standing rule in advertising, which is don't make political statements because you'll alienate half of your audience, and they all are potential customers. When they did the commercial with Kaepernick, if you remember, people were burning their running shoes, in demonstrations against Nike. The stock dropped 20%. And so the question was, should Nike pull it? Now, I don't know this to be true, but I'm willing to bet it is. There were a whole lot of people around a big conference table in Oregon where Nike is based. And they did a risk assessment. And they looked at the value of their brand, which is a multi-billion-dollar global brand. And they said, we've got to stand behind our principles, because if we lose credibility, that will destroy the brand. And so they stuck with it, which looked like they were maintaining integrity, and they were taking their products and placing principles above product, above profit, which ended up in them making more profit. And the stock ascended to new highs. No companies had done that before. It's pretty fascinating. So, a brand these days comes to mean a lot more than just separating it so it's not a commodity. There's a necessity now to announce what your values are and put that out there. And if you're going to be credible when now your main spokesperson is Michael Jordan, and not Michael Jordan, it was Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and your spokesperson is LeBron James, and you're using Colin Kaepernick in your commercials, you've got to be consistent with that, because now with social media, which also wasn't a factor 20, 25 years ago when you were talking, it's not just the company talking to the consumers can talk and react back. So that puts a whole other layer on businesses that didn't used to be there, which presents a whole new host of challenges.
One of the most successful athlete shoes ever is the half cab that Vans makes for Steve Caballero. No one even knows about this, but this shoe has been around basically as long as Air Jordans have. And the guy he's obviously a masterful skateboarder. I mean, he's almost 60, so he skates in a different way. But he's an artist. He paints decks and does all this stuff. But somehow, all that success didn't net this bigger empire for him. With as big as skateboarding has gotten. What do you think happens in these cases where you have something? I mean, if you're going to start a shoe, making Steve's shoe your target, like let's be better than that, would be a really hard goal to do. What is it about something like that where everything's there, but it just didn't go boom?
Well, I think that one of the things is you're dealing with a niche market. And when you're dealing with a niche market, you're not going to have as much of an impact as if you're Nike, who not only sells to athletes, they sell to people in their 70s who are, wearing, jogging pants and shoes and the jerseys, even though they're just walking around the shopping mall. So the breadth of their customer base is so big that, so they aren't a niche market, nor is Apple anymore, being the largest corporation, I think, in the world at this point. So I think that's one of the big differences. They're not niche, they're major market players on a global scale.
I want to ask one real quick question about mentoring, because I think it's important to get your thoughts on this. One of the things that a mentor does, they'll put you on the horns of a dilemma. Here is this really big dragon you have to slay, and that's where I'm going to direct you to put your work in. You may not like it, but that person, one of the reasons why they're a mentor is they've seen this. These are the hallmarks of success or BS, So talk a little bit about that. Like how do you take the advice of a mentor and go after and kill that dragon when they're purposely putting you in this, like, this is a yes no thing. Either you're going to be this or you're not. Go figure out how to kill this thing.
I think that I can only obviously answer for myself. I think that you've got to sort of evaluate the challenge and understand why that challenge is being put into your path. It's like the seventh voyage of Sinbad or something. You have to overcome the Cyclops and you got to overcome the Hydra and all those things along the way. So I can't really answer that. I don't really know, because I think that because I don't do that. When I am asked by, former students who are out there in the world, I'm trying to give them, if they ask me something, it's a specific advice about a specific situation. And so I don't try to put them through some kind of, prove you're serious gymnastics about it. So not functioning that way, I can't give you a good answer.
What would be the Madoff answer then?
Or the Madoff answer?
God damn it, Madoff answer. Sorry. God damn it. What would be the Madoff answer?
Well, what's the specific question?
Well, so if you're not going to put them on the horns of a dilemma, like, how do you create the opportunity for that mentee to grow?
Okay, so I'll give you a practical example from my class. I started doing this about 10 years ago, and it has worked every semester, and the students have gotten tremendous value from it. And what I have them do, because I don't give them any busy work. I hated it when I was in school, and I wanted to create.
That's great.
I wanted to create a class that I'd want to take. Okay. So I have them for their midterm research a company that they want to work for, write a cover letter and resume. And then we go over their cover letters and resumes. And I give them, but not only myself, I have the other students, and it's really fascinating. I have the other students also give them feedback, because they don't know what they know. And that's one of the things that I found absolutely fascinating about teaching. I'm in my 14th year of teaching. And one of the things that I discovered is teaching is a great way to learn, and that I learn from the students too. So you don't know what you know until you're challenged with the questions. So we would then have the students, the student present their cover letter, and I have the other students, I tell them, you're the HR department. Evaluate this presentation and evaluate the resume. And then we talk about, here's what you can do to make this better. And Pete, I can tell you one of the most satisfying things to me, and this just happened recently, I will get an email from a former student who will say that they used what they learned from going through that process, where they were not even getting responses before they've actually gotten jobs from. And I'll get a thank you. And it makes me feel so good, because that's one of the reasons that I teach, that I've helped them, and I've helped them achieve something they want. And so the task of writing a cover letter and a resume is towards a real goal, because I tell them what you're going to net out of this is an actual tool that you can use. This isn't just to do it. This is something that when you finish, and if you take to heart the responses that you get and you redo it based on the edits and notes that you're given, this is a tool that can help you get in the door and create opportunities for yourself.
Yeah, what a fantastic way to approach that problem. Some peer reviews, some wisdom from the teacher. I want to encourage anybody who's on the fence, and you shouldn't be, get off the damn fence and start creating something. But anybody who's trying to do this, whether you're building tabletop arcade games or you want to design, shirts that everybody wants to wear, get creative careers, making a living with your ideas from Jeffrey at the Amazon link below. I'll put that in the show notes as well, because this guy knows what he's doing. Look, he's a playwright. He's been a fashion designer. He's done video production. And most importantly, he's taught people how to do these things. And you're right. Learning from teaching is an incredibly powerful tool, because as this one group learns, they leave you with lessons that you get to pass on, and then you iterate and iterate and iterate. So it's just a fantastic example of how to do this as we all try to figure it out. Whether you're middle-aged and trying to figure out what's next, or pivoting because of COVID, all of these things, you need some good counsel. And I can't think of anyone better than Jeff to provide that. I mean, you've done so many incredible things. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing these lessons. And again, people before you even had you on the show are like, I love his work. I love this idea. And people are constantly asking me about their creative endeavors. So quit asking me, start reading Jeff.
Well, thank you, Pete. I mean, this has been really great. I love it when it just feels like you're having coffee with a friend talking about stuff that matters. And that's what this felt like. So thank you so much.
Even though I screwed up your name and called you, wrote down Bernie one time, I apologize for that. We all have our bad days on things. Normally I get that stuff right, but I promise I will continue to get better at it. Hey, thanks again so much. And if I can ever do anything for you, let me know. Let me sign off here. Stand by.